Hello, everybody. I'm Alexis Brink, and I'm the director of Shin Institute, and I'm a member of the Social Action Committee for the USA TAA. And today I'm welcoming Stephan Hausner. He's an expert in family constellations in the field of illness and health, and he is an alternative medicine practitioner. Welcome, Stephan. Can you explain what is family constellation and why is it effective?
First of all, nice to meet you, Alexis, and thank you so much for the invitation. Well, this is a question, this has multi-layer, I will have to say. Basically, for me, a constellation is the possibility to kind of set up a relational system with representatives. And these representatives kind of embody members of the system. Mostly it's the family, but you can also set up an organization or any other system. And I personally apply it for ill people mostly today. And the idea is to get some hidden information about dynamics running within this system you're setting up. And especially when you work in the field of illness and health, you can find out kind of what is nourishing an illness, mostly within the family system, what kinds of dynamics are nourishing the illness or some symptoms. And then by exploring what dynamics are nourishing the illness, you can maybe also find out how you can change as a client, as a patient, what you can change, how you can change your perspective in a way that maybe this system does not need the symptom or the illness anymore.
So,
yes,
yeah, that's
please.
very interesting because in Jinshin, we're talking about ancestral energy, and you're talking about the energy of our ancestors. So I see a great link here. Are we talking about the same thing? Are you talking about an energy?
Well, basically, from my perspective, symptoms balance relationships. In terms of connecting people, bringing them together, or also separating people. And when you talk about the ancestors, the question kind of is, what kind of concept are we as facilitators holding in the background? And for me, the family system mainly, including, well, when we say the ancestors, we have to talk about trauma. But for me, we as kind of children are carrying the family system within our body.
Mm-hmm.
When I did the first workshop with Bert Hellinger, the main learning experience for me was to understand that you cannot reduce illness to a personal thing. That especially for a lot of illnesses, if you want to work with them, to heal them, you need to look at the connection the symptom has within the family system, also maybe the purpose this symptom has within the family system. So, of course, on one layer, I would say we talk about energy. And on the other side, I would say we mostly talk about the trauma that is still alive in the presence because it could not be healed in the moment when it has happened. No?
Mm-hmm.
I think when we talk about this, yes, please, go ahead.
I'm just curious because I actually studied with Bert Hellinger. I did a constellation work with him many, many years ago. And so he was your teacher. And what was the main thing that you learned from him? Because he's quite new. He really introduced this whole concept, right? This whole theory.
In a way you can say so, yeah. Because there was a woman, Thea Schönfelder, he was the first one to work with constellations, but as far as I know, Bert Hellinger was the one who understood that the reactions of the representatives kind of are the feelings and the body sensations these representatives have are kind of are showing the dynamic within the system, and then you can work with this dynamic. Let me just close this door. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah,
just 1 second.
I'm going to ask you a question. Can you explain how this is actually set up in a room? Can you explain what does it look like, a family constellation, for people who don't know about it? And is this a form of psychology? Is this considered a form of psychology? And what does it look like?
Okay.
Family
So first of all, the client needs, me as a facilitator working with a client, we need to agree on a certain question. Because at that point, I would rather talk a little bit about the problems of family constellations also, because one problem from my perspective of family constellation is that you can set up everything and there's always an outcome. And when I talk about setting up something, means that if we work on a certain question or on a symptom, me as a facilitator, I need to kind of find out what are the elements needed in a way to embody or to understand the dynamic that is nourishing this symptom. Mm-hmm. So first of all, we need to find out what is a good result of this piece of work for the client. And then I hopefully as a facilitator know what elements I need to set up. And then I ask the client to kind of define and ask the people in the room if they are willing to represent these elements. Let's say someone represents the symptom, someone represents the father, someone represents the mother, someone represents the client. And
well,
then
they actually stand up, right? They stand up and they stand up. The representatives, they stand up and they come around.
The representatives stand up and they kind of tune into the situation, and then something happens because somehow they know when they are open, they know where they need to stand to kind of represent the current situation within the room.
So how do they get this information? How does the representative know? Is this intuition? Is this a connection to the person? Because they don't know the person.
They do not know this person.
What is this?
And in a way, you are addressing one of the problems of constellation work. Well, maybe the problems I say in a little bit of provocative way, because this is maybe exactly the reason why it's working, but we do not know how this is going to happening. Today, for me, it's very important as a constellation facilitator to acknowledge that I do not know what I do. I do not know what a constellation is. I do not know how the representatives get the information. If I am asking you, for example, in a group to represent my mother, there's only one thing clear for me: you are not my mother. This is the only thing that is very clear. The fact that you maybe feel like her, the fact that you maybe move like her, the fact that you maybe use even wording, the same wording that she used, is something which is happening, but we do not have an explanation for this.
I mean, this is very interesting because in Jinshin Jitsu, the work that I do, we listen to the pulse and we get all this information as well. Jiro Murai, the father, called it ancestral energy. So we get all this information from the body. And so a question to you is, do you believe in energy work as I'm explaining it to you? Because this is really an Eastern philosophy, and then constellationist work is really a Western theory, right? But it sounds to me that you're working with this kind of energy and that the information is available to the representatives and to the person that you're working with directly. Could that make sense?
Well, I would say that the information kind of is in the air. And when we are opening ourselves up for the information, it looks like we have the ability to capture, to get this information. Um, for, so I mean, me too, I have some training in craniosacral work, and I've experienced a lot of sessions in craniosacral work. So I know that basically I can read the body, I can read the constellation. Basically, for me, the constellation is kind of the tool, is the stick we use to work with. But we can, but basically, if we would be open enough, we would not need the constellation. We could get the information through the body of the client. We could get the information through the field, the energy field. These are all terms. To be honest, I would say we are not clear what it actually is. We just see that it's working.
Can you
The important thing is that we can work with it. What it is, for me, is not so important.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, as practitioners, I think it's just an interesting conversation. I'm always interested in bringing Eastern philosophies and Western philosophies together. And to me, this seems like something where in the East, they understand universal energy or consciousness. And then in the West, it's expressed in a different way, but we probably are all using it. It's available to all of us. And that's what you clearly see in constellation work, that it is available to anybody. All the representatives receive that. I was wondering, can you give an example of somebody that you've worked with, just so that people understand what it would look like?
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the most intriguing examples for me was basically when I worked with a doctor suffering from bone cancer. And we have set up someone for him and someone for the illness. And then in a second step, we have set up someone for the father and the mother. And what we saw in the constellation is that there's a connection between the symptoms and the mother. So I asked the client about his relationship with his mother. And he said, well, he has a very good relationship with his mother. And so at that point, we didn't get some significant information. So I decided to interrupt at that point because I felt within his body, he was not really open to kind of cooperate with this process. So I said to him, well, I think we have to leave it like this for the moment. And then, first of all, in the first moment, he got a bit disappointed because he said he came quite a long way to do this work with me, and now this is kind of frustrating. And I said to him, well, if we see a change tomorrow, if something has changed for him tomorrow, then I'm happy to continue his work, to work with him. And then he said, well, he has an important treatment the next day, and he has not planned to be here the next day. So I said to him, well, you need to decide what is important. And he decided to stay. And the next day we started in the same way with the constellation. kind of luckily, there were new participants in the group. So I asked him to choose representatives who have not seen the process from the day before. And the interesting thing was it kind of showed exactly the same movements. Again, we saw a connection between the illness and the mother. So I said to him, I need some more information about his relationship. There must be something relevant. And then we found out that even though he has already had an amputation from one of the surgeries, from the cancer surgeries, his mother did not know about his illness. So I said to him, how can you have a good relationship? He said, well, I'm talking every day with my mother. And I asked him, what are you talking about? When you exclude, when you exclude the illness, no? And then this was for me kind of a moment to start the therapeutic work, because then I asked the representative of the mother to stand opposite of him. And I asked him to look into her eyes, saying, dear mom, look, I am ill, I am sick. And then something happened. The representative of the mother, instead of what you would normally accept, what you would normally expect, is that the mother would take the child, no? And kind of hold the child, but the representative of the mother got dizzy and she stumbled back and was clearly overwhelmed looking at the sick boy, no? So I asked the representative of the mother to say to him, my dear child, even if you die, I cannot give you more. And this kind of information was entered into his body like a shock. I had a feeling, sitting next to him, I had a feeling that his concept, maybe even of life, no, was kind of falling into pieces like a house of cards. They were just falling into each other. And he clearly had kind of a shock in his body from this sentence. And then I kept on working with him in a way that he accepted that he got enough from his mother. Now, the background was also his mother got him when she was 17 years old. So maybe this was already the background that she kind of, he felt that she was in a constant state of being overwhelmed with the child. No?
Mhm.
And the interesting thing was, but basically this was all the work we did. We kind of reconciled him with the mother, acknowledging that he got enough. The most important thing he got from her, and the rest he's going to do by himself. No? Because what I understood more and more in constellation work is that in very illnesses, we kind of are identified with an unfulfilled childish longing. And through the illness or through the symptoms, we try to get something from our parents that basically is not possible anymore because it's gone, because it was not possible in the time when we were small. But in a way, we're holding this identification on throughout our life. And so the interesting thing was that after this piece of work, the organizer of this group got a message from him, an email from him, that for some reason the radiation treatment he has been already in suddenly started to work. So the idea
Mhm.
is clearly that kind of a blockage was taken out, was taken away, no, by this process.
Yeah,
This was very remarkable. And there I
it
also
is.
understood how extremely effective a constellation can be. And basically, because you asked already before, how is it working or why is it working? Um, Basically, I think what really is working is that we get a new perspective, we get a new relationship towards life, we get a new relationship towards our parents or other family members. And maybe by changing the perspective, maybe by opening up the heart for the people that belong to us, for our close relatives, we find some peace in the soul, and maybe this peace in the soul maybe can lead to some peace in the body, no?
Mhm. Yes, so this is a remarkable story. And I heard about you from Janine Pecorelli. I took a trauma workshop with her. And so do you work a lot with specifically with, older trauma, or also problems in the here and now, emotional problems? Like if somebody would see a therapist, a talking therapist, would you work with those kind of problems as well, like psychological?
Mhm. Well, today, to be honest, today I discern anymore a question from a symptom, because for me, behind this, there's the same underlying principle. No? If
Mhm.
we are busy with an ongoing question and we do not find an answer, or if we are suffering from a symptom, most probably we do not find a solution, because the solution is basically outside of our concept, is outside of our perspective. No? That means if we have a question and we do not find the answer, most probably the answer is here, and we just look at this. No? And the
Mhm.
same thing is when we are suffering from a symptom. I would say my idea is that when the energy is circling for a long time in the same direction, then kind of a symptom is manifesting. No? And what needs to happen basically in both situations, no? We need to open up and we need to see more to, as what we see so far. And this is why I really like to work with constellations, is because every constellation, whether we do it for ourselves or if we just watch the constellation also, is kind of an invitation to this movement. No? So,
Mhm.
and we need to understand that there is a certain reason why this is our world. No? Because trauma basically means that we are overwhelmed. And when there's too much information that we can kind of withhold, we need to close down, and we need to um, uh, dissociate, and need to separate from the information. And we need to protect us. No? And we need to
Mhm.
understand that on one side, closing down, um, stopping the relationship to this information basically is needed in order to survive this moment. But we also need to understand that this also leads to a limitation. No? And
Mhm.
then if this gets conditioned, and this then is our world, at one point we want to explore and we want to grow and we want to expand, but then kind of we need to open up. And then what happens is we are again with the information that for at some time before, and even sometimes generations before, we needed to protect us from this information. In that way, the healing movement is also, we can also say the healing movement is we kind of close a gestalt, we kind of finish a movement that one day could not be finished.
Mhm.
You understand what I mean?
Uh, yes, and so you also look at the grandparents and like the whole family, right? Can be
Sure.
behind it.
Sure, because what we learn through constellation work and also now through epigenetic, we learn that the trauma, even it has been our parents' trauma, or it has been the trauma of our grandparents. This, uh, because this movement could not be finished, could not be fulfilled. Um,
Mm.
this is why kind of a residue from the past is still present in our life. Now we're still dealing with the traumas of our parents and grandparents,
Mhm.
and we're carrying them and we're holding them, and in a way we participate in them. And the big possibility is we can make ourselves available and open ourselves up. If we do some personal work, if we do some healing work, we can open ourselves up for this trauma, and then we can kind of relate to what had to be excluded in that time. And when we include it, we kind of can heal that trauma.
Mhm. So yeah, you mentioned epigenetics, and there hasn't been a lot of research done about it, right? But I guess that you certainly feel it has an impact.
Yeah, well, I mean, the epigenetics just says that we're not only passing on our genes, we're also passing the effects of behavior. We're also passing on the effects of trauma from generation to generation. No, me too.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I see it myself because I come from a Holocaust surviving family, and I'm the second generation. My father was in it, and his mother died,
Mm.
and I also see some of it in my children again. And so you are saying that we can change our genetics, we can change our epigenetics, and then move on from there.
Um, well, one thing is when you say you see within your children, you see some effects still from the past. From my perspective, I would say, of course, you have an influence on your children as the mother, of course, and mainly the healing movement is that you kind of look back into the past of your family, and in a way you open up your heart for all the things that kind of are not yet spoken out, are not yet felt. No, there has been a congress in some years ago. There has been a congress in Heidelberg, and the title of the congress was "When the War is Over." No? I mean,
Mhm.
I have not been to that Congress, but from my perspective, the war is over when there's not anybody anymore alive who has the need to talk about it, but not kind of coming from a perspective of avoiding. No, coming from a perspective, there's no need to anymore talk about it because everything is said, everything is felt, everything is acknowledged. Everything that has been suffered kind of gets its place and is integrated. Then, from my perspective, the gestalt of the war is over. And maybe it's right what the Bible says, no, that it takes 7 generations or something like that, no. But hopefully that there's one day, hopefully there's at one in one day there's one day there will be a time when we can say, okay, this gestalt of the Second World War has come to a conclusion, and then maybe our children do not have to deal with it anymore, no.
Mhm.
But
Yes, that
the,
is
the, the
wonderful.
important information out of this basically is that every one of us can kind of open up, can make himself or herself available as a place of transformation for all this energy that has not yet been digested.
Mhm. Yes, so yes, that will probably take some while. And it's also us being just human beings. We come in with, we have our genetics, we have all this generational stuff. So it's just there and for us to deal with. When I say I see it in, for example, my son, sometimes with anxiety, or I feel sometimes it doesn't belong to him.
Mm.
And, so there's things like this. So that would be very interesting for him, for
Mhm,
example, to
mhm,
do this kind
mhm. Yeah, this is basically how we define entanglement. No, if somebody has to live aspects that do not belong to
of,
him
right.
or herself. No, this is how we define an entanglement. No,
Yes,
without sometimes you can see it that this does not belong to this person, and in the same time, even knowing it is not yet enough. No.
exactly. So, I guess that's when you can help, right? Is that when people come to you for help in
In a
situations
way,
like
yes. In a way, I try to figure out um, what is the hidden truth or the hidden dynamic, or what does the body want to express through a symptom. Is it related to a personal trauma? Is it related to a trauma of my parents? or is it maybe related to a trauma of my grandparents, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. I've seen a video where you work with countries as well. Can you just briefly explain how you can work in organizations and how you can work even within the world? And then can we change, can we make changes like that?
Well,
How
I think you refer to a constellation that I did together with Thomas Hübel about the conflict in North Korea.
Yes.
I have to say that the idea of this constellation was not to heal something. The idea of the constellation was to explore what can be the effect of what Thomas Hübel calls global social witnessing. Means what happens if there's a group of people opening up for a social conflict. And the idea is, of course, as I mentioned already, the principle before, no? A lot of problems arise where something is excluded. No? And you say, okay, all the information is in the air. No? All the information is kind of available. So what does a group of people do, or what is the effect if there's a group of people that is opening up the heart for kind of a social conflict, which of course is much bigger than everybody of these persons. But if there's a big group of people, and there have been about 800 people, what happens if these 800 people are opening up their hearts for what is going on in this conflict? No? And the idea is that when they open up the heart for this conflict, and then kind of sharing, sensing, integrating what they feel, then maybe this has an effect kind of backwards to the conflict also. No? I mean, in terms of a social conflict, no? I mean, today with the internet, no, we are all connected, and we all have conflicts of the world in our living room. No? When we open up the television, when we look into the internet, there's a lot of information of conflicts, no? Worldwide. But mostly what happens when we see these conflicts, when we relate to these conflicts, mostly we get overwhelmed and we get numb. No? And the idea is, what would happen if we kind of at least notice when we get numb, or when we bring some awareness in what is doing the conflict to us. No? So this constellation about North Korea and the countries who are kind of involved and inflicted, related to that conflict today, was more an experiment to see how constellation work can kind of support this process of global social witnessing.
Mm-hmm. Because we also then get to understand how the other countries feel. I mean, that was very strange. What is their position? And it's like how
Yeah.
they feel. They became almost like a person with their insecurities and their feelings. That was
Yeah,
very interesting.
yeah, right. And we, with our body, allow this to happen within ourselves. No? In
Mhm.
that way, we actively participate in a conflict, even so we are not personally involved, which is basically not true when I say, because we are personally involved. When we look at us as a world community, every conflict which is on the world is also alive within us. No?
Yes, absolutely. We are a microcosm of the macrocosm, right?
Exactly.
That's really how do we function in the larger picture. So Stefan, I know we're gonna bring this to an end because we're gonna go to questions.
Hmm.
Oh, we have one question.
Okay.
Go, Paula.
Okay. From Saru. I've experienced this with dolls set up in a constellation online. Is it different face to face?
Well, to be honest, from my perspective, it's very different. because seeing representatives from my experience and seeing the representative kind of move the information, express the information, from my experience, this goes much, much deeper into the cells of the observer, of the client, than with dolls. But of course, there are also a lot of possibilities. And to be honest, basically the effect of a constellation has mostly to do with changing the perspective. And of course, also with dolls, you can reach that. No? But for me, I prefer to work with representatives because the constellation kind of is my correction. If I read kind of the energy within the body of the client and I bring in contact the question of the client with, let's say, the family system, the representatives kind of are a correcting element for me. So when I create an hypothesis and I express the hypothesis, I kind of share my sensations, there will be reactions of the representatives. And this is an element, this is not there with dolls. No? When I work with dolls, I'm kind of challenged to interpretate much more the picture than when I have when I work with representatives. There's a kind of a correcting element. This is why I prefer to work in groups.
Do representatives take on symptoms sometimes as well, or feelings? Because it can be very emotional, if I remember correctly.
Well, it can be very emotional. And of course, the task of the constellation facilitator is to see whether a representative is overwhelmed with what he or she experiences in this representation. And of course, there are also different ways to deal with, because some facilitators, they kind of de-roll after every constellation. I personally only try to figure out if there's an overwhelmment or not, because if somebody is overwhelmed, of course, this person needs help in order to kind of feel him or herself again more precisely. But if, as long as the representatives are not overwhelmed with the sensations they feel they have, I kind of leave them because I usually say them, well, enjoy the sensation, because it's also something that can be helpful for you if you allow this movement going through your body, no?
Yeah, because they probably have something coming up from themselves then.
Exactly.
So
This is the nice thing also when you work, when you do it in a group work, because basically you learn from every constellation.
Yeah.
And of course, the personal constellation for sure is should be the most important thing, but this is not even, we cannot even say this. No, there has been an investigation done in Germany, in Heidelberg, in the university, and the result of the investigation was that, of course, the ones who do a constellation have a certain effect, but also the ones who are just representatives have a certain effect. No? And from my perspective, this has to do with the concept that health, for me, basically is the ability to respond. No? And that means we are constantly exposed to stimuli. We are constantly exposed to bacteria, to viruses. We're constantly exposed to our parents, to family members, to the environment. And the health, to be healthy means to find an adequate response to that. No? And so basically what I do when I work is I try to figure out where is the fixation and what does it need to bring movement back to the fixation. I think we also have a kind of a coherence in the work we do, because basically this for me is the main thing in general in therapy. No? So, and when I am a representative, I am kind of invited to movement, and this can be a healing for myself. No?
Yeah, yes. And have you done any constellation on what's happening today in the world with COVID and all of that?
No, no, so far not. No.
It could be interesting. Maybe we can do that.
Well,
So if people, yeah.
Well, to be honest, when you address the situation today, you know, what we mainly see is that a lot of answers we create to this situation come from a place of fear. No?
Mm-hmm.
And when there's fear, basically there's not much creativity. No? And so for me, the question mainly would be, where does this fear come from? No? And how can we get out of this state of overwhelmness, of being overwhelmed by the situation, and what everyone personally can do in order to be more flexible with what is going on. No? Mm-hmm. To not get into a trauma state, to not get into a fixation, and then kind of act like, yeah, as I said, out of fear. What does everybody need to stay flexible with this? No?
And do you have any suggestion for that, like this?
Well,
like
maybe one thing basically is the self-contact, no? Because one thing is, of course, the first thing in order to work with the fixation is you need to get a sense of the fixation. So practicing self-contact, basically in let's say in meditation, but also in seeing therapists, like the work you do, no, where the therapists bring kind of awareness to the fixated parts in the body and bring movement into that. Everywhere where you bring movement into that, you bring liveliness into it. No?
Yes.
And this is basically the main principle, no?
After this is over, then I'm sure that a lot of trauma will surface, and you're going to be very busy, Stephan. After we have one more question here.
I'm used to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Heal the world.
Yes. One more question from
please.
Marcia. I was the representative daughter in a constellation, and my husband represented my father. And although I knew he was my husband in reality, I identified more strongly with the person I was representing. Is this usual?
Yeah, I would say this is usual. Because once we're in the representation, we kind of, it looks like we step into the world of this representation. I personally try to avoid to bring in couples into these situations, no? Because maybe some feelings or so get mixed up, no?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But I would say this is a usual phenomenon, yes.
Thank you. And Stephan, if people want to work with you, where can they find you? And you've also written a book. Lola will put a link in the comments. But where can people find you? Are you available to work with people?
Yes. Well, people find the best way. People find me through my website.
I found you.
You found me, yes. And I'm even also now I'm doing a very few one-to-one constellations through online. But basically, I hope that there will come a time soon when we can work with groups again. And well, so far I've been working in about 50 countries. And people can see on my website where I'm going to be. And yeah, this is probably the way to find me.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This was very, very insightful. I learned a lot. Thank you. It was an honor to talk to you. And I'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, Alexis. And
Well,
yeah, all best for you
thank
in
you.
these kind of uncertain times or times of change. No? Let's call it times of change. No?
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay. Have a
Bye.
good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.